Mrs. Shobana Subramanian graduated with a gold medal and additionally was the best outgoing student in her Bachelor's of Architecture batch. Mrs. Shobana, working as a senior architect at the Engineering Design Research Center, L&T Construction, India's largest construction company. She has worked on various projects including hospitals, office buildings, residential, recreational to institutional projects. She has also attended 4 national conferences, 1 international conference, and an international Indo-French workshop initiated by the UN Heritage on the urban morphology and architectural typology of the Karekudi Heritage, Chettinad.
Welcome to UGC lecture series for B Architecture. Today we'll be looking at history of architecture and culture, prehistoric age. The contents of this video are as follows. Introduction. We will be introduced to history and why we should learn history and how to understand historical buildings. Next, we'll be looking at prehistoric age, seeing the Paleolithic age, Neolithic age, evolution of their culture, civilization, art forms. And finally, we'll be finishing off by looking at prehistoric structures, which is further subdivided into Paleolithic structures and Neolithic structures. History. Why we should learn history? History is the best teacher. It prepares us for the present and the future. For every human being, at certain point in their life, they would have been influenced by a building. It is not the built, but the relationship with the built environment that creates this lasting memory. Every architectural masterpiece which creates a lasting memory with a human has a timelessness feeling to it, and such a masterpiece should be well studied in depth. As the famous architect Daniel Libeskind said, to provide meaningful architecture is not to parody history but to articulate it. And also from history we learn our values, and architecture is nothing but an expression of our values. Evolution of buildings and spaces. How early human beings resided in natural caves to having man-made structures inside caves. Human beings residing in plains made structures out of trees, rocks, and now the more recent structures we have for residences like apartments and individual houses. And this was an example for residential building, the evolution of residential building. Now, evolution of spaces. For example, community space. It was initially just a space where community gathered under a tree or an open space surrounded by huts to an enclosed space. Then later more function was added to the space like religion and recreation. Now we have community spaces where public gathers, and it even includes shopping malls with its public atriums. Evolution of structures. Started from simple structure made of tree branches covered with twigs. As more functions and as more activities were added, more spaces were added and functions were associated with them. So the structure became more intricate. Then experimentation with other materials like stone and mortar. Then came cement, steel, reinforced cement, to the present experimentation with new materials. Evolution of construction methodology. Initially man did everything. They used to have as much manpower as possible to move materials, to erect stones. Then they domesticated animals to do this work. And now we have machines to move materials and lift large parts. Now, how to understand a historical building and classify the style of the building. First, we have to look at the basic detail like the location and the name of the building. Next, we have to look at the time period of the building, or which dynasty was it built under, or which ruler was ruling when it was built. Next, we have to look at the architect, sculptor or designer of the building. Then influences under which the building was constructed. These influences could be geographical, geological, climate, religion, historical and socio-political. Next, the function of the building. What was the building built for? Was it for recreation? What is for religious purposes? Or was it just for the community to be gathered? Next, the idea or concept behind the building. Next, we have to look at the salient features or iconic features of the building. This could be the ornamentation of the building, or the way the openings are treated, or the way the roof is treated, or any particular piece that stands out in the building. And then we have to sketch these buildings to understand them better. Now, how to classify the style of the building? We have to understand the architectural character of the building to understand style. These architectural characters we can learn by the following: to understand the plan of the building a general distribution of the building, whether it is linear or radial or rectangular, and how the spaces inside the plan are associated with each other. Next, the walls, how the walls is constructed and how they are treated and what material they have used. Next, the roof, the shape of the roof, whether it is dome roof, flat roof, conical, and how they have constructed the roof and what is the ornamentation on the roof. Next, the openings, how they have treated the openings, the character and shape of these openings. Next, the columns, their position, structure and decoration. We have to particularly look at the capital decoration, the shaft and the base decorations to make out which era or which period this building belongs to. Then we have to look for moldings, the form, the decoration. Lastly, ornamentation as applied in general. What kind of ornamentation, what material they use for the ornamentation, is it stone or is it metal? By understanding these features and looking at these features and learning about them, we can easily identify the style of the building and place it in which period of history it belongs to. Now we look at prehistoric age. First, the Paleolithic age. Paleolithic age, the humans were leading a nomadic life. Food, shelter, protection was the main reason for them to colonize. And other reason was the more humans were together, it was easier to hunt and it was easier to protect themselves from predators. These humans or nomads were majorly living in caves, and they, after coming back from their work or hunting, they will be documenting their lives in the cave walls in the form of paintings or drawings. This was the foundation for artworks and cave paintings. One of the famous cave paintings of Paleolithic age can be found in Lascaux, France. These nomads also domesticated animals, but it was majorly for the reason of traveling and carrying their luggage from one place to another. Around 9000 BC, humans discovered agriculture and farming, and this time they domesticated animals for other activities than traveling, that was for work, milk, wool and farming. The Fertile Crescent of Western Asia first saw the Neolithic domestication of animals, starting the Neolithic Revolution. Not everyone used to farm. Some people who were not farming involved themselves in other activities such as pot making, metalwork, art and architecture. This gradual transition from wild harvesting to deliberate cultivation happened simultaneously in several parts of the world. Agriculture allowed for support of larger population, thus creating larger societies and evolution of cities. Now we will look at prehistoric structures. The origins of architecture, although lost in the mist of antiquity, must have been connected intimately with the endeavors of man to provide for his physical wants. The early prehistoric dwellings were imitated from nature. According to Vitruvius man in his primitive savages began to imitate nature. He looked at the way the birds were building the nests, the animals were using their lairs, and he tried to imitate them. The main three classification of dwellings in this era was caves, huts and tents. Caves were used by people who hunted and fishing. Caves or rocks for those who were occupied in hunting. Hut for the agriculturist and tent for the nomads. Prehistoric structures. Prehistoric structures can be classified as follows. Monoliths or single upright stones. These are also called menhirs. One famous example being a 63 feet high, 14 feet diameter, weighing 260 tons at menhir at Karnak. A famous example being 63 feet high, 14 feet in diameter and 260 tons of stone or menhir at Karnak, Brittany. Next were dolmens. Dolmens basically means dol, which means a table, and men, which means a stone. So these were just flat stone slabs erected on vertical stones. Examples of dolmen can be found in England, Ireland, northern France, Italy and India. Next were cromlechs. Cromlech or circles of stone, for example the Stonehenge, Avebury and elsewhere, consisting of a series of upright stone arranged in a circle and supporting horizontal slabs. Tumulus or burial grounds were probably the prototypes for pyramids of Egypt and beehive huts of England. Next we see lake dwellings. Lake dwellings as discovered in the lakes of Switzerland. They were mainly found in the valleys of rivers and were posted, as you can see, they consisted of wooden huts supported on wooden piles and were so placed for protection against hostile attacks of all kinds. Now we will look at Neolithic age and dwellings in Neolithic age. As we had learned before, agricultural evolution gave rise to the Neolithic era, and the earliest known civilizations existed in this era. Two best examples of Neolithic civilization or Neolithic settlements are Jericho, modern Israel, which was formed around 8000 BC, Çatalhöyük, Anatolia, modern Turkey, which was occupied around 7500 to 5700 BC. Now, let us continue with Neolithic age dwellings. We had seen two examples for Neolithic dwellings of Jericho and Çatalhöyük. Now, we will look into detail. Settlement of Jericho. As you can see, the earliest settlements of Jericho had 27 feet thick of fortressed walls, covering an area of 10 acres inside. The initial settlements included mud huts which could possibly have conical roofs. The inhabitants were farmers and hunters who buried their dead below the hut roofs. This is a map of the settlement of Jericho from Farhi Bible. This shows the fortress walls like a maze with the city inside. This is an expression of how much fortification was done for the settlement. Next, the settlement of Çatalhöyük. This, in contrast to the settlement of Jericho, has no fortress walls. The town was a dense package of dwellings without streets. Residents gained access to the dwellings across roofs. You can see the ladders here through which the access was given to each of the dwelling. There were high openings in the walls for ventilation. The structure was made of mud brick walls, and a post and lintel timber framework enclosed the rectangular spaces that abutted the neighboring houses, so that together they established a perimeter town wall. So there was no need for fortification. So instead of a fortress, these densely packed houses themselves defined a boundary for the settlement. Interspersed with these settlements were the shrines, which were not provided with any windows and were decorated with motifs of bulls and cult statues. Çatalhöyük is the precursor for more sophisticated communities that developed in the fertile valleys of Tigris and Euphrates River at the beginning of 4th millennium. Now, Neolithic age, structures of Neolithic age. Megalith constructions. Significant achievement of Neolithic age was the megalith constructions. These were large stones or boulders erected in a circular pattern and which were used for astronomical observation and communal tombs. Megalith literally means large stone. A famous megalith construction is Stonehenge, which is found in Wiltshire, England, and a communal tomb is Passageway Grave, found in Newgrange. These communal tombs were made of drywall masonry without mortar and with corbelled roofs. These tombs can be found in Spain and France. As you can observe from this, in Neolithic age, more respect and importance was given to the dead. Constructing these communal graves for cremated or skeletal remains seemed to have not only be an expression of reverence to the ancestors, but also a means of establishing claims to land. Now we will look in detail of the megalith construction, Stonehenge. Stonehenge was constructed in several phases. The phases are as follows. First, there was earthwork enclosure. As you can see, a circular ditch and bank monument about 375 feet in diameter cut into chalk of Salisbury Plain about 3000 BC. This earthwork is the henge in Stonehenge, though in most Neolithic henges the ditch was outside of the bank. In this Stonehenge, the ditch is inside of the bank. Inside the bank, timber posts may have stood in these 56 circular pits that you see. Timber posts would have stood in these pits that lined the inner edge of the bank. Next stage is the timber monuments. A distinct new phase took place in the middle of Neolithic period. Timber posts were erected in linear patterns near the northeast entrance and across the center towards the southern entrance. The next stage is erecting of blue stones. Blue stones, or stones which had the color blue when wet, were erected in semicircular or circular arrangement. These stones probably appeared by 2500 BC at the earliest being pairs of 4-ton bluestones brought 250 miles from Wales. These were erected in the center of the earth bank. The next stage being the Sarsen Circle. Stonehenge got its iconic form with the creation of 16 feet high Sarsen Circle. Sarsen Circle is made of stones quarried from Sarsen. 30 worked stones topped by lintel in a horseshoe configuration inside. You can see the outer circle was made of 30 stones topped with lintel. Inside there was a horseshoe configuration of trilithians. Trilithians are made of 3 stones with 2 stones, 1 stone erected on 2 stones. This circle of 5 freestanding trilithians each forms of 2 upright stones lined by a lintel. The tallest one, this one, reaches up to 25 meters. Later refinements were made to this structure. Bluestones that had been cast aside were repositioned as a circle and horseshoe. This was the circle and this is the horseshoe. And double ring of pits were dug up around the north and south. By 1500 BC, the Stonehenge was not properly maintained. Now we will look at the components of a Stonehenge. As we had seen earlier, the center of the Stonehenge is made up of Sarsen Circle. To the north is the North Barrow and south is the South Barrow. The outer Sarsen Circle is further surrounded by pits in the ground which are called Z holes, and the next ring of holes is called the Y holes. To the east of the South Barrow stone was the station stone. 2 station stones were erected, one to the north of the South Barrow stone and another to the south of the North Barrow stone. In the northeast direction of this structure was the heel stone. The position of the heel stone defined the summer solstice, and at the center you can see the altar stone. The position of the heel stone, the slaughter stone, altar stone and trilithians define the solstices. It was supporting the winter solstice and opposing the summer solstice. The construction of Stonehenge. There are several theories as to how they constructed the Stonehenge. The most common being the stones were transported in wooden logs and hoisted to an erect position with the help of ropes. This is the construction process. First, the stones were pulled and pushed towards the pre-dug pit. Once one edge of the monolith was placed in the pit, it was hoisted and erected with the help of ropes. As you can see here, they brought in timber logs to help erecting the stone. Once the stone was erect, they filled the pit with earth and locking the stone in position. Now, how they placed the lintel on the erected stones? They made temporary structures. As you can see here, they made temporary structures with the help of wood logs and made platforms on top. They used timber and wooden platforms to raise the lintel slab to position it on top of the erected stones. Another theory is they used a wheel. Engineer Nick Wegener believes that a wooden wheel was used to erect these lintel on top of the stone. This is a mechanism similar to his litholift. As you can see here, the lintel was attached to one portion of the wheel and the wheel was rotated and this lintel was placed on top of the erected stones. This required careful planning and calculation. The stones weigh between 5 and 45 tons. Now, summarizing this episode, what you learned from this episode: you were introduced to the history and prehistoric age. Then we looked at prehistoric structures which were divided into Paleolithic structures, cave, tent, hut. Then we looked at monolith, dolmen, tumulus, lake dwellings and cromlechs. Later we looked at Neolithic structures and Neolithic settlements of Jericho and Catalhoyuk, and megalith constructions, Stonehenge and megalith tombs. Students, for your understanding you can take up the following questions. Explain how relevant it is to study history of architecture and how relevant it is in our present times. What are the major differences between Paleolithic and Neolithic ages? Differences between their culture, their civilization and their dwellings. Explain Stonehenge with respect to the sun's path and how it was used as an astronomical observatory. And explain in detail any one of the megalith tomb with an example. Thank you.